Right now, you could walk up to two completely self-made, wildly successful millionaires and ask them for the fundamental secret to building wealth.
Yeah, and you would probably get two completely different
Yes,
answers.
exactly. I
Uh,
mean, the first one will look you dead in the eye and tell you that buying a house is the greatest, most secure investment you will ever make in your life.
Right. While the second millionaire will look at you with equal conviction and tell you that your house is a toxic liability that is actively keeping you poor.
Welcome to the absolute chaos of personal finance.
It really is an environment of uh, just profound informational whiplash.
Oh, completely.
I mean, we are living in an era where everyone has a megaphone and everyone is absolutely certain that their specific map to financial security is the only one that actually works.
Yeah.
And, for someone just trying to figure out how to stop living paycheck to paycheck, it is incredibly paralyzing.
And that paralysis is exactly what we are focusing on for you today. If you're listening to this, you likely share that universal desire to achieve financial freedom.
Right. You want your money to work for you, not the other way around.
But you are navigating this dense jungle of contradictory advice. Like one camp screams that you need to cut out your daily coffee, clip coupons, and put every single penny into a savings account.
While the other camp is telling you that saving pennies is a trap for the middle class, and you need to leverage massive amounts of debt to buy real estate immediately.
Which is why our mission today is to cut through that noise. We have gathered a fascinating stack of sources to synthesize with the goal of figuring out the actual evidence-based formula for building wealth.
Yeah, we're going to explore whether traditional conservative financial education is the right path for you, or if the entrepreneurial rebellion we see so much of online is actually the secret.
Okay, let's unpack this because the sources we have today are incredibly diverse. We are looking at dense macroeconomic academic research on global financial literacy from the International Journal of Creative Research Thoughts.
And we are pairing that with empirical hard data on K through 12 financial education programs from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Which is fascinating data, by the way.
Oh, it's incredible. And then we are going to crash all of that highly structured institutional data headfirst into the incredibly popular yet highly controversial pop finance philosophies of Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Right, the ultimate finance rebel.
Exactly. And finally, we will look at some very harsh technical critiques of his methods from financial accounting experts like FQMOM, Avier Wealth Management, and Boyrath.
So we're looking at money through macroeconomics, educational policy, and individual behavioral psychology.
Yep, three completely different lenses.
So to figure out how to get to financial freedom, we logically have to start by understanding where we currently are as a society. I mean, if wealth is the ultimate goal, how equipped is the average person right now to actually achieve it?
Well, if we look at the macro data from the International Journal of Creative Research Thoughts, the IJCRT, the reality is quite sobering. The average person is not equipped at all.
Not even a little bit.
No, and this isn't just a guess based on some small survey. The IJCRT analyzed secondary data from massive, globally recognized sources. Specifically, they pulled from the World Bank Global Findex and the OECD Financial Literacy Surveys.
Let's pause there for a second because we hear those acronyms thrown around on the news all the time. But let's define what they actually are so we know why we should trust this data.
Absolutely. So the OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's essentially an intergovernmental organization of mostly high-income countries that tracks economic progress and world trade.
Right.
When they do a survey, they're looking at massive, statistically significant populations across dozens of developed nations. It's not a small sample size.
Okay. And what about the Global Findex?
The World Bank Global Findex is the world's most comprehensive database on how adults save, borrow, make payments, and manage risk. They're tracking who actually has a bank account, who is using mobile money, and who is completely unbanked across the entire globe.
Okay, so this is heavy-hitting institutional data. Now, when the IJCRT says people lack financial literacy, what exactly are they testing? Because, I mean, if you put a complex Wall Street hedge fund algorithm in front of me, I'm going to fail that test too.
Well, the good news is they aren't testing advanced financial modeling.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah, they are testing the absolute foundational concepts of money. We are talking about understanding how to create and stick to a basic budget, the mechanics of saving, the underlying principles of investing.
Basic stuff, yeah.
Exactly. They test to see if people understand the corrosive power of inflation, meaning, do you understand that $1 today buys less than $1 10 years from now?
Right.
And they test the concept of risk diversification, which is really just the formal term for not putting all your eggs in one basket.
It's the alphabet of money. I mean, you can't possibly write a novel if you haven't been taught what the letters are.
Precisely. And what the IJCRT data highlights is a direct, objectively measurable positive correlation. Higher financial literacy directly and undeniably equates to higher personal wealth accumulation over time.
So knowing the alphabet actually pays off.
It does. The people who understand these basic concepts are fundamentally better equipped to make sound financial decisions. They manage risks better, they accumulate more assets, they save more for the long term, and crucially, they manage their debt far better than those who don't understand the concepts.
But when you actually dig into the demographics of who holds this knowledge, there are glaring disparities. It isn't just a blanket statement that everyone is bad at money.
No, not at all.
Financial literacy is alarmingly low among very specific vulnerable groups. Young adults, specifically those under 30, score terribly. Low-income households and individuals with limited formal education show drastically lower literacy rates.
And there is also a documented, measurable gender gap in the OECD data.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it shows that men consistently score higher on these specific assessments than women, which of course forces us to look at the mechanisms behind why these gaps even exist.
Why do low-income households score so much lower?
It's a systemic, self-perpetuating cycle. If you grow up in a low-income environment, your daily life requires very little interaction with complex financial products.
You aren't sitting around the dinner table discussing the performance of a stock portfolio or the tax advantages of a retirement account.
Exactly. If you don't have the money to invest, you don't interact with investment accounts. And if you don't use them, you never learn the mechanics of how they work.
Right, so it's an exposure problem.
It is.
Yeah.
And because you lack that exposure, when you do need capital, say your car breaks down and you need it to get to work, you are significantly more susceptible to predatory high-interest debt products like payday loans.
Because you just don't know any better.
Right. You don't have the literacy to calculate how a 400% annualized interest rate will ruin you. And furthermore, the data shows that even when individuals from these groups do acquire a little bit of capital, they are far less likely to invest it.
Which just keeps them out of the wealth-building cycle entirely.
Yep.
I hear the logic there, but I have to push back a little on the premise of the research. Is simply handing someone a textbook on inflation and compound interest really enough to change their financial reality?
That's a fair question.
I mean, if someone is working 3 minimum wage jobs just to keep the lights on and feed their kids, they don't have a resource problem because they failed a quiz on risk diversification. They have a resource problem because they simply do not have any money.
Sure.
So does income level just completely dictate the outcome, regardless of how much financial knowledge you try to pump into their brain?
That is the essential critique of financial literacy programs, and it's a very valid one. You cannot budget your way out of absolute poverty if your income simply doesn't cover basic biological needs.
Yeah.
However, the IJCRT clarifies their stance on this, and it's a crucial distinction. Yes, your income level absolutely dictates your immediate resources, but financial literacy dictates your behavior with whatever resources you do have.
Okay, walk me through what that behavioral difference looks like in practice.
Let's take two individuals who both make minimum wage and both face a sudden $500 medical expense. The person with low financial literacy might panic and go to a payday lender.
Right, needing the cash instantly.
Exactly. And then they enter a cycle of debt where they end up paying back $2,000 over the next year, which completely devastates their already fragile budget.
It's a nightmare scenario.
It is. But the person with higher financial literacy, despite having the exact same low income, understands the math of that payday loan. Because of that literacy, their behavior changes.
So what do they do instead?
Well, they might opt to negotiate a payment plan directly with the hospital, or they might utilize a lower interest credit union loan. The literacy didn't magically make them rich, but it provided the behavioral tools to avoid a financial pitfall that would have kept them permanently trapped.
Oh, I see. It builds economic resilience at the margins.
Exactly. It's about damage control and making the best possible choice in a bad situation.
So if a lack of knowledge is the root problem that leads to these devastating behavioral traps, the most logical, obvious solution is education. We just need to teach people the alphabet of money before they become adults.
Which sounds simple on paper.
Right, but anyone who has sat through a high school algebra class wondering when they will ever use this in the real world knows that traditional schooling is constantly criticized for failing to teach actual life skills.
Oh, constantly.
So the multi-million-dollar question is, does school-based financial education actually work?
To answer that, we turn to an incredible, comprehensive report from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. This report tracks the evolution of state mandates for financial education in the United States over several decades.
And what did they find?
Well, the overarching conclusion is that how we teach this material matters just as much, if not more, than what we teach.
Because initially we were really, really bad at teaching it. The report looks at early state mandates, roughly from 1957 to 1987. And the results of those mandates were essentially a failure.
A total failure.
They showed zero measurable effect on the long-term financial behavior of the students once they became adults.
Zero effect. And the reason they failed so completely is because the implementation was incredibly weak and unfocused.
Like, how unfocused are we talking?
Well, a state legislature might pass a law mandating that schools, quote-unquote, teach consumer economics.
Yeah.
But without funding, without a standardized curriculum or, any teacher training, that mandate was basically meaningless.
Right, I can just
Right.
picture it. That mandate trickles down to a high school, and the principal tells the 11th grade history teacher, hey, you need to cover consumer economics this semester.
Exactly.
So the history teacher spends 15 minutes mentioning the concept of interest rates during a lecture on the Great Depression, checks a box, and moves on.
Yep.
The students didn't learn how to balance a checkbook, they just memorized a vocabulary word for a history test.
Exactly. It lacked rigor and it lacked relevance. But the CFPB report then contrasts those early failures with the post-2000 era of rigorous state mandates.
Okay, so things got better.
Much better. They look specifically at states like Georgia, Texas, and Idaho. These states didn't just suggest teaching finance, they implemented serious, tested, dedicated course requirements that students had to pass prior to graduation.
And the data from these programs is phenomenal.
It's staggering.
The methodology they use to track this is what makes it so undeniable. The Urban et al. Study featured in the CFPB report didn't just ask the students if they felt smarter. They used massive, anonymized administrative credit data directly from Equifax.
Right. They didn't rely on self-reporting.
They tracked the actual credit files of these students as they entered adulthood.
And the results were stark. When they looked at the third-year graduating classes under these new, rigorous mandates in Georgia and Texas, those young adults saw their actual credit scores jump by 23 to 26 points compared to young adults in control states who didn't receive the education.
Which is a massive real-world impact. I mean, a 25-point jump in a credit score isn't just a gold star on a test.
No, it's life-changing.
That is the difference between getting approved for an apartment lease or getting denied. It's the difference between qualifying for a prime interest rate on a car loan, saving thousands of dollars over the life of the loan, versus getting stuck with a subprime rate.
Exactly. And not only did their scores go up, but their delinquency rates, meaning the frequency at which they missed payments on their debts, dropped significantly.
And you touched on something important a second ago. They looked at the third-year graduating class. The data showed a compounding effect over time.
Yes, that's a key detail.
The first year a state implements a mandate, the teachers are still figuring out the curriculum. But by year 3, the teachers are comfortable, the lesson plans are refined, and the real-world impact on the students' financial lives deepens significantly.
And it didn't just change how they handled credit cards either. There's another study in the report, the Stoddard and Urban study, that looked at how this education changed the way these young adults financed college.
Oh, student loans.
Yeah, the big one. It showed that students who received this rigorous financial education actually shifted their behavior away from high-cost private student loans and high-interest credit card debt.
And they moved toward lower-cost federal Stafford loans instead.
Exactly. They also increased their applications for grants and scholarships. They became smart, analytical shoppers for debt, rather than just signing whatever paperwork the financial aid office slid across the desk.
Because they finally understood the math behind the paperwork.
Exactly. But the CFPB report goes deeper than just state mandates. It looks at the psychology of learning, specifically the difference between theoretical learning and experiential learning. And this is vital for younger demographics.
This is where the source material gets incredibly fun. They detail a specific program called My Classroom Economy.
Oh, I love this one.
Right. This was tested in Palm Beach, Florida, with fourth and fifth graders. And the brilliance of this program is that they didn't sit these 10-year-olds down and lecture them on the Federal Reserve or the history of banking.
No, that would put them right to sleep.
Exactly. Instead, they turned the classroom into a fully functioning, simulated economy.
The students were required to pay rent for their physical desks using simulated classroom currency.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. And they could earn a salary by holding classroom jobs. They earned bonuses for academic achievements or good behavior. And they incurred fines for breaking rules or turning in homework late.
So it's a completely closed economic system.
Yes, they had a regular payday, they had a classroom store where they could spend their currency on privileges or small items, and they were forced to actively manage a budget.
It's pure experiential learning. I like to compare it to learning to ride a bicycle. You can read a physics textbook about a bicycle. You can memorize the equations of balance, momentum, and gravity.
Sure.
You can pass a written test on bicycle theory perfectly. But you absolutely cannot learn how to ride a bike until you get on the seat, pedal, lose your balance, and occasionally scrape your knee.
That's a great way to put it.
My classroom economy allows kids to scrape their financial knees in a perfectly safe, controlled environment.
That is a perfect analogy. If a fifth grader gets their classroom paycheck and immediately blows all of their currency on fake candy or toys at the classroom store, and then Friday rolls around and they can't pay the rent for their desk, well, they experience the visceral, psychological stress of a budget shortfall.
But they experience it without actually going bankrupt or getting evicted in the real world.
Exactly. They learn the consequence of the behavior before the consequence can ruin their life.
And the results of the randomized controlled trials for this program were incredible. It vastly improved their financial knowledge, their self-reported budgeting skills, and their financial socialization.
Right, meaning these 10-year-olds went home and actually started talking to their parents about budgeting and money.
Which is probably a shock to the parents.
Definitely. The report also highlights the stock market game, where students managed a virtual $100,000 portfolio. And the fascinating byproduct of that program was that it didn't just teach them about equities.
What else did it do?
It objectively improved their standardized math scores.
Wow, really?
Yeah, because it took abstract math and grounded it in a highly engaging, high-stakes context. Calculating percentages is boring on a worksheet. Calculating the percentage return on your virtual Apple stock so you can beat your classmate in a competition, that is thrilling.
That makes total sense. But if we zoom out and look beyond the United States, the international data in this report provides some incredible surprises that really challenge our assumptions about how financial education works in practice.
Yes, the International Randomized Controlled Trials, or RCTs, these are some of the most rigorous forms of scientific studies available. Let's look at the data from Peru, for example.
But what happened in Peru?
They implemented a massive pilot program called Finanzas en mi Colegio. What makes this study so remarkable wasn't just the positive effect on the students, but the unintended, profound effect on the teachers themselves.
I love this detail from the deep dive.
It's so good. Just by being forced to teach the curriculum, the teacher's own personal financial behaviors radically improved. The data show that teachers who taught the course became 14 percentage points more likely to save their own money in a formal financial channel compared to a control group of teachers.
You can just imagine it. A teacher is up there at the chalkboard, passionately explaining the mechanics of compound interest to a group of teenagers, and mid-sentence, a light bulb goes off in their own head. They think, wait a minute, I have zero retirement savings. I should probably be doing this myself. It proves that the fundamentals of financial literacy are universally effective, regardless of age.
Absolutely.
But we have to talk about the study from Brazil, because this piece of data completely threw me for a loop and highlights a hidden danger in all of this.
Yes, the Brazil paradox. This is perhaps one of the most complex and vital pieces of data in the entire CFPB report.
So what exactly is the paradox?
Well, researchers conducted a massive 17-month study with roughly 25,000 high school students across Brazil. The financial education curriculum was intensive and comprehensive. And initially, the results were exactly what you would hope for.
Meaning they got better at handling money?
Yes. The education significantly increased the students' financial proficiency. It improved their saving habits, their ability to track a budget, and remarkably, their likelihood of negotiating prices when making purchases. These are all highly positive, empowering outcomes.
But there is a massive but here.
There is. Simultaneously, the study revealed that the education also increased the students' likelihood of borrowing money, purchasing consumer items on credit, and consequently, it increased the likelihood that they would be late on their credit repayments.
Okay, let's unpack this mechanism because it
Yep.
sounds completely contradictory. We gave them intensive financial education, which made them better at budgeting, but it also made them go out, rack up debt for consumer goods like clothes and electronics, and then fall behind on those payments. How does teaching someone about money make them worse at handling debt?
It comes down to the psychology of confidence and the specific cultural context of the financial environment they live in.
Okay.
In Brazil, there is a very prevalent culture of purchasing everyday consumer goods like sneakers or a television on high-interest installment plans.
Right. Buy now, pay later.
Exactly. The researchers hypothesized that the course, while heavy on budgeting and saving, didn't explicitly warn enough against the specific dangers of these easily accessible high-interest installment plans.
So the education removed their fear of the financial system.
Exactly. The students gained financial autonomy and, most importantly, financial confidence. Before the class, they might have avoided credit entirely because it was confusing and intimidating.
But after the class, they understood the basic mechanics of how a loan worked.
Right. They felt empowered. They felt like they were in control. But that very confidence made them eager to utilize credit before their adolescent impulse control was fully developed and before they fully grasped the long-term compounding consequences of consumer debt.
It's an incredibly bitter irony. It's like giving someone just enough martial arts training to make them confident enough to think they can win a bar fight.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. But because they are a novice, that confidence actually puts them in far more danger than if they had just remained terrified and run away from the fight in the first place. We handed them a financial shield, and they immediately used it to hit themselves in the face.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. It highlights that financial education cannot just be about the math. It has to deeply address behavioral psychology and impulse control.
So, synthesizing this first half of our deep dive, the macro data from the IJCRT undeniably proves that a lack of financial literacy keeps people trapped.
Yes.
And the CFPB data proves that traditional schools can teach this literacy effectively, provided the curriculum is rigorous, experiential, and culturally relevant. It seems like the institutions are finally figuring out the formula.
Which brings us to a critical pivot point. Because while the academic and institutional world is slowly refining these state mandates and proving that traditional education works, there is a massive multi-million-dollar industry out there arguing the exact opposite.
Right. If schools are the solution, why is there an entire movement telling us that the education system is actually a trap?
Exactly.
This brings us to the ultimate pop finance rebel, Robert Kiyosaki, and his globally dominant book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. If the IJCRT and CFPB represent the institutional, methodical approach to wealth, Kiyosaki represents the entrepreneurial rebellion against those very institutions.
And it is a fundamental rebellion. We're looking specifically at Chapter 3 of his book, which lays out his core philosophy.
And what is that philosophy, in a nutshell?
Kiyosaki's thesis is that the entire traditional school system is not broken. Rather, it is functioning perfectly to do exactly what it was designed to do, which is teach you how to be a highly compliant, hardworking employee who works for money.
So it trains you to seek a safe profession, get a steady paycheck, pay high income taxes, and spend your life enriching your employer.
Precisely.
He argues that the rich do not play by those rules, the rich do not work for money, the rich build systems that make money work for them. And to illustrate this mindset shift, he uses one of my favorite anecdotes from the book, the story of Ray Kroc, the man who built the McDonald's empire.
It's a classic illustration of Kiyosaki's third lesson, which is simply titled, Mind Your Own Business.
So the story goes like this. Ray Kroc is invited to speak to a group of MBA students at the University of Texas. It's a casual setting, they're having a few beers, and Kroc asks the room, "Who can tell me what business I'm in?"
And the MBA students all laugh, assuming it's a rhetorical joke.
Right. Finally, one of the students speaks up and says, "Ray, everyone in the world knows you're in the hamburger business." And Kroc stops them and replies, "No, I am not in the hamburger business. My business is real estate."
And this interaction strikes at the very heart of Kiyosaki's entire philosophy. Kroc explained to those students that while the primary profession of the McDonald's Corporation was indeed selling hamburgers and French fries, the actual business, the underlying mechanism that built unimaginable generational wealth, was acquiring the physical real estate underneath those franchise locations.
So the franchisees were working hard selling burgers to pay for the land, effectively buying the real estate for McDonald's.
Exactly.
So Kiyosaki uses this story to force the reader to separate their profession from their business. This is a huge paradigm shift. If you are listening to this on your commute right now, Kiyosaki would ask you, what is your profession and what is your business?
It's a profound question to ask yourself.
Your profession might be a teacher, an engineer, a software developer, or a mechanic. That is what you do for 40 hours a week to generate your daily income to survive and pay bills. But your business, in Kiyosaki's worldview, is your asset column.
Right. It's the real estate you own, the dividend-paying stocks you hold, the intellectual property you created. Your business is what generates passive income while you are sleeping.
His argument is that if you spend your entire life solely focusing on your profession, getting better at your job to get a 3% raise, you are spending your entire life minding someone else's business. You are building your employer's asset column, not your own.
But to truly understand how Kiyosaki expects you to build that asset column, we have to look at how he completely redefines the English language.
Right, he doesn't use normal definitions.
No, he takes the standard financial dictionary and throws it out the window to serve his psychological framework. His definitions of assets and liabilities are highly unconventional, and honestly, they are what make his book so viral and so polarizing.
Let's lay out those definitions clearly.
Okay, so to Robert Kiyosaki, an asset is strictly and exclusively defined by cash flow. If something puts money into your pocket every single month, whether you get out of bed to work or not, it is an asset. Conversely, a liability is anything that takes money out of your pocket every month.
Which sounds simple enough until he applies it to the American dream. Because of this definition, Kiyosaki takes the most controversial stance in personal finance. He looks the reader in the eye and says that your personal house, the home you live in, the one you've been told your whole life is your greatest investment, is actually a liability.
And as you noted in the opening of our deep dive, people lose their minds over this concept. They look at their home equity and scream, "My house is my biggest asset."
But Kiyosaki forces you to look at the cash flow. Every single month, money leaves your pocket to pay the mortgage. Money leaves your pocket for property taxes. Money leaves your pocket for the roof repair, the water heater, the homeowner's insurance, the HOA fees. Your house is constantly draining your cash flow.
Therefore, by his strict definition, it is a liability.
He argues it only magically transforms into an asset if you move out, rent it to someone else, and the rental income they pay you covers the mortgage, the taxes, the repairs, and leaves extra positive cash in your pocket at the end of the month.
It is a radical, almost aggressive simplification of finance. But psychologically, it is incredibly effective at shifting a person's mindset. It trains the brain to stop accumulating shiny objects, like big houses, fancy cars, or boats that drain resources, and starts training the brain to hunt for cash-flowing investments.
And he has a great story to back up how this specific mindset changes your real-world behavior. He tells the story of his wife, Kim Kiyosaki, deciding she wanted to buy a 60-foot sailboat in Hawaii.
Oh, this is a perfect example.
Now, let's be honest, a giant boat is the ultimate liability. It is a literal hole in the water that you throw money into. If she operated with a poor mindset, according to Kiyosaki, she would have looked at the massive price tag of the boat, looked at her bank account, and said, "I can't afford this."
But Kiyosaki argues that the rich mindset never allows the phrase, "I can't afford it," to cross your lips. Because the moment you say, "I can't afford it," your brain shuts down. The problem is solved, albeit negatively. Instead, the rich mindset forces you to ask a question. How can I afford this?
A question forces your brain to work and seek solutions.
Exactly.
So she didn't just give up, but she also didn't just buy it and eat the massive monthly loan and maintenance costs out of her salary. She figured out a way to turn this luxury liability into a cash-flowing asset.
She structured a brilliant deal.
She did. She put the boat into a charter company. So on the weekends when they weren't personally sailing it, the boat was being chartered out to tourists in the Hawaiian Islands. The revenue generated from that charter business paid the bank loan, paid the dock fees, paid the maintenance, and covered all the expenses.
She got the luxury items she wanted, but she didn't have to work extra hours at a profession to pay for it. The asset generated the cash flow that paid for the luxury.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If we pull back the curtain on this philosophy, we have to examine the mechanism that makes this kind of rapid asset acquisition possible. And that mechanism is debt.
Yes, the dreaded D word.
Right. Let's debate this, because this is where the sailboat story goes from motivating to terrifying for the average person. Kiyosaki essentially preaches that to get rich, you need to use other people's money. He champions the idea of good debt.
He does.
He is telling average people who maybe barely have $1,000 in savings to go out and leverage bank loans to buy real estate businesses or charter boats.
Yeah.
Isn't leveraging massive amounts of debt just playing with fire for a normal person who is just trying not to go bankrupt?
That is the exact crux of the danger in his philosophy, and it's why he faces so much backlash. Kiyosaki defines good debt as debt used to acquire an asset that generates enough cash flow to pay off the debt itself, just like the sailboat.
But you are absolutely correct to push back.
Leveraging debt requires an incredibly high risk tolerance, deep market knowledge, and crucially the liquidity to absorb a loss if the market turns.
Let's run a hypothetical on the sailboat to prove that point. Say Kim Kiyosaki takes out a massive loan for the boat, relying on the tourist charter income to pay the monthly note. What happens if a global pandemic hits or the Hawaiian tourism market just temporarily crashes?
Suddenly, no one is chartering that boat.
The cash flow drops to zero. But guess what? The bank does not care that tourism is down. The bank still wants their $5,000 monthly loan payment.
Yep.
If she doesn't have massive cash reserves to cover that shortfall, the bank repossesses the boat, ruins her credit, and she faces bankruptcy. Suddenly, that genius good debt becomes a crushing liability.
What's fascinating here is that the traditional financial experts look at Kiyosaki's advice as a recipe for disaster for the average, unsophisticated investor precisely because of scenarios like that.
Right.
And this transitions us perfectly away from pop finance and into the cold, hard reality of professional accounting.
Yes, let's bring in our final stack of sources, because the traditional financial world, the certified accountants, the wealth managers, are practically pulling their hair out over Kiyosaki's definition.
Oh, they despise his definitions.
We have source material here from FQ Mom, a prominent financial literacy advocate, an analysis from Avier Wealth Management, and a deep dive from Boy Rath. And they all converge on one singular, irrefutable point. Robert Kiyosaki's definitions of assets and liabilities are technically, fundamentally, and legally incorrect according to GAAP.
Yes, GAAP stands for Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. It is the standardized system of guidelines and procedures used by accountants globally to ensure financial reporting is accurate and transparent. And under GAAP, Kiyosaki is just plain wrong.
Okay, let's play the role of a CPA for a minute. Let's build a case study to understand why Kiyosaki's definitions are dangerous. Let's imagine a guy on Instagram. He looks incredibly rich. He owns 3 rental properties, a fancy truck for his landscaping business, and he's constantly talking about his cash flow.
Okay, classic finance influencer.
Right. But if we force him to sit down and build actual GAAP-compliant financial statements, what is the right way to look at his money? Break down the 3 statements for us.
Under standard accounting, there are 3 basic financial statements you must understand to see the full picture. The first is the balance sheet.
Okay.
I want you to think of the balance sheet as a photograph. It is a snapshot of your financial health at one specific frozen moment in time. On the left side of this document, you list your assets.
And these are real assets, not Kiyosaki assets.
Right. These are resources you own that have measurable economic value like cash in the bank, index funds, the fancy truck, and yes, the physical houses.
Okay.
On the right side, you list your liabilities. These are the sources of funding for those resources. The mortgages, the auto loan for the truck, and the mathematical difference between the 2 assets minus liabilities is your equity or your true net worth.
So on a factual balance sheet, a house absolutely is an asset because it has underlying appraisable value. If you sell the house and pay off the mortgage, the remaining cash is yours. Kiyosaki is mathematically wrong to call it a liability.
Correct. The second document is the income statement. If the balance sheet is a photograph, the income statement is a video.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, it measures a period of time like a full calendar year. It tracks your revenues money earned minus your expenses money spent. The result is your net income.
Got it. And the third?
Finally, the third document is the cash flow statement. This is like tracking the plumbing of your finances. It simply tracks the literal, physical movement of cash into and out of your bank accounts over that period of time.
And this brings up a really important concept that Avier Wealth Management points out, accrual accounting.
Yes, crucial concept.
The income statement uses accrual accounting, which Kiyosaki completely ignores. Let me try to explain this with an analogy to see if I have it right.
Go for it.
Let's say I own a freelance consulting business. I finish a massive project for a client in December, and I send them an invoice for $10,000. The client is slow, and they don't actually mail me the check until late January.
Okay, standard business problem.
Under accrual accounting, I earned that $10,000 in December because the economic value was created then, and it shows up on my December income statement. But Kiyosaki's cash flow only brain wouldn't count it until the literal cash hits my bank account in January. Is that right?
That is exactly right. Accrual accounting matches revenues and expenses to the period they actually occur, providing a much more accurate picture of a business's long-term profitability.
But Kiyosaki just bypasses that.
He ignores this entirely. He has essentially taken the cash flow statement, the plumbing, and superimposed it over the balance sheet. He is defining a balance sheet item, like a house, solely by its cash flow implications.
But I have to play devil's advocate here. Why does this technicality actually matter to the average listener?
Well, it matters a lot.
I mean, if Kiyosaki's wildly inaccurate definitions get people to stop buying dumb stuff on credit cards and start buying rental properties and businesses, who cares if he upsets some CPAs? If the psychology works, isn't that enough?
It matters immensely because of the danger of illiquidity, which FQ Mom highlights brilliantly in her analysis. Liquidity refers to how quickly you can convert an asset into cold, hard cash without losing value.
Right.
Under Kiyosaki's model, our hypothetical Instagram guy might become incredibly asset-rich. He owns those 3 rental properties in a landscaping business. His balance sheet looks massive on paper. He has a high net worth. But what happens if the economy dips? 2 of his renters lose their jobs and stop paying rent. Suddenly, the cash flow stops. But the bank still wants the mortgages for all 3 properties.
Oh, man.
Our Instagram guy has millions in real estate equity, but he has no actual cash in the bank to pay his immediate bills. He's entirely illiquid. FQ Mom points out the brutal reality of finance. You can be a millionaire on paper and still face total bankruptcy if you cannot pay your electric bill or your mortgage today.
It's the ultimate trap. Being rich on paper means nothing if the bank is foreclosing on you. Kiyosaki's simplistic model glosses over the vital, boring need for cash liquidity and robust emergency safety nets.
And that brings us to the analysis from Boy Rath, which perfectly contrasts the high-wire act of rich dad, poor dad with traditional, real financial advice.
What does Boy Rath advocate?
Well, they point out that traditional certified financial planners advocate for a completely different path. It is not about escaping the rat race by Friday. It is not about leveraging massive debt. It is slow, methodical, and empirically evidence-based.
Traditional advice is about building an unshakable bomb-proof foundation. It relies on the boring stuff. Living below your means, establishing a robust emergency cash fund of 3 to 6 months of expenses, which directly solves that illiquidity danger we just discussed.
Exactly.
It champions aggressively paying down all debt, not trying to outsmart the system with good debt. And once that foundation is set, traditional advice champions investing in highly diversified, low-cost index funds, like the S&P 500.
Right. The philosophy there is that you don't try to beat the market by finding some genius, undervalued real estate deal like Kiyosaki suggests. You simply buy a tiny piece of the 500 largest companies in America, and you capture the overall historical growth of the global economy over decades. You let compound interest do the heavy lifting while you sleep.
It is remarkably boring, but mathematically it works almost 100% of the time if you are patient enough to wait 30 years. Whereas Kiyosaki is pitching active entrepreneurship. He wants you hunting for deals, starting businesses, and leveraging debt to amplify your returns. It is high risk, high stress, and high reward.
So we arrive at the ultimate question for our listener. We have the IJCRT telling us we need basic macroeconomic knowledge. We have the CFPB proving that experiential learning in schools works, but can also lead to overconfidence.
Right.
We have Kiyosaki telling us to use debt to buy assets and ignore the traditional path. And we have accountants telling us Kiyosaki is technically wrong, dangerous, and we should just buy index funds. How does one combine these diametrically opposed viewpoints?
So, what does this all mean? Synthesis is the key here. The goal isn't to declare one path the absolute winner and the other a total fraud. It's about utilizing the best tools from each worldview at the appropriate time in your life.
I agree completely.
If you were listening to this, a highly effective, synthesized roadmap would look something like this.
First, you must use the traditional conservative financial advice highlighted by Boy Rath and the accountants to build your unshakable foundation. You have to educate yourself on the basics: inflation, budgeting, and standard job accounting.
Build that liquid emergency fund. Eliminate your high-interest consumer debt. Start consistently contributing to broad, low-cost index funds. You must secure your baseline survival first.
Build a safety net.
Exactly. So if you decide to walk the tightrope later and you fall, you bounce back up instead of hitting the concrete and going bankrupt.
Precisely. But once that secure, boring foundation is fully established, then you can afford to adopt Kiyosaki's psychological framework. You can use his rich dad mindset to view the world through an entrepreneurial cash flow lens.
You start looking for side hustles. When you want a luxury item, you stop saying, I can't afford it, and start asking, what asset can I create or buy that will generate the cash flow to afford this?
You use the accountants to ensure you don't ruin your life, and you use Kiyosaki's mindset to hunt for opportunities to accelerate your wealth beyond just a standard salary.
It's like building a high-performance sports car. The accountants provide the seatbelts, the roll cage, and the anti-lock brakes. Kiyosaki provides the turbocharged engine. You absolutely need both if you want to go fast safely.
That's a brilliant way to phrase it.
To quickly recap the incredible ground we've covered today, the macro data from the IJCRT undeniably proves that simply possessing basic financial literacy equates to greater long-term wealth.
The CFPB data proves that this literacy isn't an innate talent. It can absolutely be taught, especially through experiential, hands-on learning environments that let young people fail safely.
Robert Kiyosaki provides a powerful, if technically flawed, psychological framework to rethink how we relate to our professions and our assets. And traditional accounting, the cold math behind the curtain, provides the necessary reality check to ensure you stay liquid and solvent.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave the listener with one final, perhaps provocative thought that emerges when you connect all these disparate dots.
Lay it on us.
We discussed the Brazilian study where robust financial education made young people so confident that they actually went out and took on more high-interest consumer debt for things like electronics.
Right.
And we discussed Kiyosaki, whose entire philosophy relies on the idea that debt, when leveraged, is a primary tool for wealth creation.
Both sources highlight the power and the danger of engaging with credit.
It forces us to ask a very difficult, systemic question. Is financial confidence actually a double-edged sword? Is it possible that the broader financial industry, the lenders, the massive credit card companies, actually relies on the general public learning just enough about concepts like leverage and credit to confidently engage with the system, but not enough to truly master it?
Oh, wow.
Are we being educated to be independently wealthy, or is there a systemic push to educate us just enough so we become highly confident, enthusiastic consumers of complex debt products that we don't fully mathematically understand?
Wow. That is a heavy, slightly terrifying thought to chew on. Just enough knowledge to be incredibly dangerous to ourselves. This has been a phenomenal deep dive into the sources. To you, the listener, we highly encourage you to take action this week. Sit down, pull out a piece of paper, and audit your own personal balance sheets using real accounting rules. Figure out your true liquid net worth and ask yourself the hard question. Are you spending your life working to build your employer's asset column, or have you started the process of making your money work for you? Remember, the path to wealth isn't a linear recipe, and it isn't a jungle you have to walk blindfolded. The map is out there, in the data, in the psychology, and in the math. You just have to learn how to read it.